Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to One Up the Annals, where shame becomes legend and history never stops peeping through the keyhole. Psycho Lust, Hitchcock's Dirty Lens, the birds, the blondes, and the bastard behind the camera. Because this evening's scroll belongs to Alfred Hitchcock, the man who turned lust into cinema's secret language. A director who could make a kiss last forever, a train ride climax in a tunnel, and a bathroom flush sound filthier than a confession booth. He called himself the master of suspense, but we know better. He was the peeping Tom of the annals. Before we go any further, let's pause for a Hitchcock-sized disclaimer. The annals are for entertainment only. Yes, Hitchcock made some of the greatest films ever shot. And yes, he also left behind a record of harassment, obsession, and cruelty, particularly towards Tippi Hedren. What you're about to hear is a mix of film history, rumor, interpretation, and lust-soaked analysis. So don't quote this podcast in your dissertation, church group, or during your next film studies midterm. I'm not here to defend Hitchcock, and I'm not here to cancel him either. This is Hitchcock's final reel, playing out in the annals of shame. Remember, these stories come from sources you can actually look up. But if you catch yourself whispering stab, stab, rinse, next time you take a shower, that's on you, not me. Alfred Hitchcock, let's go! Act 1. Cold Open. Welcome back to One Up the Annals, where shame becomes legend, lust leaves fingerprints, and even the master of suspense couldn't keep his hands off the camera. Tonight we're not talking about Hitchcock the genius, we're talking about Hitchcock the voyeur. The man who turned lust into cinema's mother tongue. The man who taught us all how to look, and then couldn't stop looking himself. The movies are crawling with it, icy blonde, sculpted and destroyed. Keyholes and handcuffs, kisses that outlasted censors. Trains rocketing into tunnels. If Freud had a popcorn bucket, it would have been filmed at a Hitchcock matinee. But the reel didn't stop at the screen. Behind the camera, his obsessions grew teeth. He cast women like collectibles. He harassed his star, Tippi Hedren, with live birds and lock contracts. He wanted to own what he could only film. And when he couldn't, he punished. This isn't the master of suspense, this is the peeping Tom of the annals, and tonight we're going to put him on trial, scene by scene, lust by lust. Because Hitchcock didn't just make thrillers, he made confessions. Before we roll the reel on Hitchcock's next obsessions, a quick word from history's favorite ally, Phil Sign-Guy. Now empires rise and fall, but the banners they carried, they mattered. Caesar had his eagles, Napoleon had his flags. Even the Borgia Pope knew you can't throw a salacious banquet of chestnuts without proper signage. That's where Phil Sign-Guy comes in. 30 years in the craft and he treats every customer like they're the only emperor in the room. Same day print, custom vinyl, reflective car magnets, even Rough Life brand merch. If history had Phil, half the wars could have been solved with a better yard sign. So whether it's your business, your brand, or your big idea, don't whisper it to the ages. Shout it, stamp it, stick it. Phil Sign-Guy makes history visible. Phil Sign-Guy on Etsy. You're listening to One Up the Annals podcast, where shame becomes legend, and Phil Sign-Guy makes sure your message does too. Act 2. The camera as kink. Hitchcock didn't need to show skin to get horny. He had something better. A camera. That lens was his cock, his confessor, and his crowbar, all in one. And he used it to pry into places you were never supposed to see. Take Rear Window, Jimmy Stewart, laid up in a wheelchair, spying on his neighbors with a telephoto lens. Sounds innocent. Until you realize the whole film is a masturbatory fantasy. He stares, we stare, and Hitchcock turns the act of peeping into the main event. It's not a murder mystery, it's a peep show. And guess what? We're all in the booth with him, feeding quarters. Then there's Psycho, Norman Bates, the mama's boy taxidermist, sneaks behind the painting of Susanna the Elders, a biblical scene of old men leering at naked women. Hitchcock could have hung any artwork there, but nope, he picked history's OG voyeur scandal. Norman leans in, breathes heavy through the peephole, watches Janet Leigh undress. Lust, guilt, punishment, all lined up like knives on a rack. And just when Norman's desire boils over, here comes the blade. That shower scene isn't just random violence. It's arousal turned into murder strokes. Stab, stab, rinse. And let's not forget Hitchcock's blonde fetish. Grace Kelly, Kim Novak, Tippi Hedren, cool as glaciers, styled to perfection, then framed like living mannequins. He once said blondes were like virgin snow, waiting to be melted. Charming, right? In his hands, they were objects of lust and punishment. He wanted them perfect. He wanted them untouchable. And he wanted them to bleed on screen. The brilliance? Hitchcock never had to tell us what to feel. He showed us. He made the audience complicit. You don't watch Rear Window, you spy. You don't watch Psycho, you peep and then you flinch. You don't admire Kelly in To Catch a Thief, you drool exactly the way he wanted you to. Hitchcock wasn't just directing actors, he was directing our lust. And when you realize that, every frame starts looking less like suspense and more like foreplay. And if the camera was his kink, wait till you see how he fought the censors in Act 3. Act 3, Lust vs. the Code. Now let's talk about the giant chastity belt strapped across Hollywood from the 1930s through the 1960s, the Hays Code. It was supposed to keep the silver screen safe and pure. No sex, no kinks, no bed sharing, no sweaty thrusts. Married couples had to sleep in separate beds because apparently if your feet touched, America would implode. And God forbid a toilet flush. I'm serious, until Hitchcock, audiences never seen one on screen. You could stab a man 50 times in the chest, but you couldn't show his bathroom habits. And Alfred looked at all these rules like a bored schoolboy eyeing a nun's habit. Challenge accepted. The kiss that beat the stopwatch. In Notorious, 1946, the censors had a little gem. No kiss longer than 3 seconds. Hitchcock thought, why stop at 3 when you could break the rules 60 times in a row? So Cary Grant and Ingrid Bergman, kiss. Break for a word, kiss again. Break for a nibble, kiss again. For 3 whole minutes, they're glued together like horny barnacles. It was a loophole orgasm, never technically breaking the 3-second limit, but giving the audience the hottest makeout scene in film history. The PCA, Production Code Administration, couldn't cut it because on paper he followed the rule. On screen, he blew it to smithereens. The orgasm that rode a train. Flash forward to North by Northwest, 1959. The lovers fall onto a train bed. Breathless, giddy, cut to a giant locomotive plowing into a tunnel. Subtlety? None. It's Hitchcock scribbling a dick on the screen in front of God and country. The code couldn't touch it because it's just a train, folks. But every adult in the theater knew what they'd just witnessed. A visual cum shot, tucked neatly into a studio thriller. Hitchcock was basically jerking off with model trains. Fireworks, chains, and fetish props. In To Catch a Thief, Cary Grant and Grace Kelly flirt while a fireworks show explodes outside the window. Each burst is timed like a bedroom soundtrack. That's not romance, that's synchronized orgasm finale. And the 39 steps? He handcuffs a man and woman together, forces them to run, stumble, sleep, and squirm, bound wrist to wrist. Hitchcock admitted later that it was deliberate. Nothing more exciting than a man and woman chained together. Bondage porn disguised as a chase film. Props were never innocent in his world. Keys, handcuffs, stockings, doors, windows, staircases. Every object doubled as a sexual stand-in. Freud would have needed a notebook and a towel. The flush heard round the world. Now let's get dirty. Literally. Psycho, 1960. Janet Leigh rips up a note, tosses the scraps into the toilet, and flushes. That flush was revolutionary. Why? because the code said toilets were indecent. Show the audience a toilet and apparently they'd riot in the aisles. But Hitchcock wasn't just being cheeky. He was saying, if I can show a flush, I can show anything. And then he did. That same scene leads to the shower. Lay undresses, bra straps, bareback, steam, the most naked Hollywood had ever dared. Then Norman watches, his eye pressed to a peephole hidden behind a painting of Susanna the Elders. The biblical story of men spying on bathing women. Hitchcock didn't hide the symbolism, he rubbed it in our faces. Voyeurism, lust, violence, murder, a toilet flush opened the door to cinema's dirtiest climax. The code is kink. Here's the truth. Hitchcock didn't just fight the code, he used it. Every time the censors said no, he turned the denial into foreplay. You can't show a long kiss? Fine. I'll make it the longest kiss in history. You can't show sex? Fine. Here's a tunnel swallowing a train. You can't show a flush? I'll make flushing itself taboo breaking. The audience didn't just see desire, they felt the danger of it. The thrill of watching someone you weren't supposed to see. Hitchcock weaponized censorship. The code tried to cockblock him. He turned it into roleplay. Which brings us to his real obsession. He didn't just use film to sculpt lust. He used women. Act 4. Making women, breaking women. Hitchcock didn't just direct actresses, he manufactured them. He styled, sculpted, dyed, dressed, and then punished them. Nowhere is that more clear than in Vertigo, 1958. Jimmy Stewart's Scotty falls in love with Madeline, played by Kim Novak. But Madeline dies, or so he thinks. Spoiler alert. Then he meets Judy, who looks almost like her. Instead of grieving, he remakes Judy into Madeline. He buys her clothes, forces her into the same suit, the same hairstyle, the same jewelry. That's not romance, that's necrophilia with a makeover budget. Hitchcock is showing us a man's lust for control, sculpting a woman into his dead fantasy, and then recoiling when she can't stay perfect. It's a love story written like a morgue visit. And here's the kicker. Critics point out that Vertigo is Hitchcock's confession. He wasn't just filming Scotty's obsession, he was filming his own. Hitchcock had already cycled through his blondes. Grace Kelly, Kim Novak, Vera Miles. Each styled with same icy perfection. He dressed them, controlled their gestures, even their speech rhythms. His actresses weren't co-stars, they were mannequins for his fetishes. From fantasy to punishment. But Hitchcock didn't stop at styling, he punished. The blonde, once sculpted, had to pay for it on screen. Madeline plunges to her death. Marion Crane undresses, is peeped at, then slashed to ribbons in the shower. In Hitchcock films, female desire often ends in blood. Marnie, rape as plot. Then comes Marnie, 1964. Tippi Hedren plays a frigid kleptomaniac haunted by trauma. Sean Connery marries her, then decides the curse for her fear of sex is to rape her. That's the scene. No euphemism. Hitchcock films it as a marital rape. Her body stiff, his body forcing. And when asked later, Hitchcock didn't deny it. He told Truffaut that he thought the scene's power came from the fetishism idea of a man who wants to own a woman completely. His words, that's not storytelling, that's kink disguised as cinema. Hedren later said those days on set were hell, that Hitchcock blurred the line between character and reality, between acting and assault. Whether you read Marnie as allegory or autobiography, the stain is the same. Lust, control, punishment. Catholic guilt and doom. Layer Catholic guilt over it, and the picture gets sharper. Hitchcock grew up steeped in shame. Sin, punishment, repression. In his films, lust is never just lust. It's always the start of doom. Desire leads to murder, sex leads to madness, even romance curdles into control. So what's the Annals angle? Hitchcock wasn't just making thrillers. He was making women in his image, and then breaking them when they didn't stay frozen as fantasy. Vertigo, sculpted and destroyed. Psycho peeped and punished. Marnie controlled and raped. It's not suspense, it's sadism. And if that sounds bad on film, just wait till we get to the set. Act 5, when Hitchcock's lust left the screen and landed squarely on his stars. But before that, quick intermission, my voyeurs, because even in the annals, merch is suspense. We've got fresh drops in the Etsy scroll shop, gifts for the Hitchcock sickos in your life, mugs, shirts, and prints that wink just as dirty as his camera lens. Perfect for sipping coffee while you spy on your neighbors, or for hanging on your wall when you need a reminder that tunnel scene in North by Northwest wasn't subtle. Head to Etsy, search One Up the Annals, and grab your own piece of Hitchcock's lusty legacy. Support the scrolls, support the shame, and support my bad habit of turning cinema into smut. Act 5, the off-screen obsession. Hitchcock's camera wasn't his only weapon. Off-screen, he wielded contracts, pranks, and humiliation like scalpels. And if you were a blonde in his orbit, God help you. The Hedron era. In 1961, Alfred Hitchcock spots a model named Tippi Hedren in a diet drink commercial. He decides on the spot she's going to be his new blonde. Not an actress, not a partner, a possession. He plucks her from obscurity, signs her to an exclusive contract, and promises to make her a star. Sounds like a fairy tale until you realize Hitchcock wasn't a fairy godmother. He was the jailer. The Birds, Real Punishment. On the set of The Birds, 1963, there's a famous attic scene where Hedren is attacked by a flock of gulls. Audiences screamed. What they didn't know? Hitchcock ordered real birds tied to her costume and hurled at her, take after take. For 5 days she was clawed, bitten, bloodied. She collapsed from exhaustion and was hospitalized. Hitchcock's excuse? Authenticity. Hedren later said it was retaliation, punishment for resisting his advances. She wasn't wrong. He made violence into method and lust into cruelty. Marnie, assault as art. Then came Marnie, 1964. Hedren's character is raped on her wedding night. Hitchcock allegedly mirrored his obsession, pressing himself on her offset. In her memoir, Hedren accuses him of assault, coercion, and a campaign of harassment. When she refused him, he froze her contract, forbidding her to work for other studios, effectively stalling her career. That wasn't direction, that was ownership. The plaster head and the coffin doll. And Hitchcock's obsession didn't stop with contracts and scenes. Hedren revealed he had a plaster cast of her head made, ostensibly for lighting and wardrobe. But in her words, it felt like a shrine. Creepy doesn't cover it. And then the coffin story. Melanie Griffith, Hedren's daughter, said that as a child she was given a doll made in her mother's image. Lying in a miniature coffin, Hedren said Hitchcock arranged it. Whether it was a prank or a threat, it was one hell of a love letter from the master of suspense. The retaliation. When Hedren finally stood up to him, Hitchcock didn't scream, didn't argue. He just said, "I'll ruin your career." And for years he did. Studios wouldn't hire her, not because she lacked talent, but because she was still locked in Hitchcock's cage. She lost years of her prime because of one man's lust dressed up as mentorship. The Annals verdict. On screen, Hitchcock punished women with knives, falls, and madness. Off-screen, he punished them with birds, contracts, and dolls and coffins. Lust, when denied, curdled into cruelty. He wasn't just the master of suspense, he was the master of obsession, and the real horror wasn't the shower scene in Psycho, it was the dressing room on stage 18. And while he was tormenting blondes in the spotlight, there was someone else behind him working the shadows. Act 6, The Shadow of Alma. Hitchcock may have been the master of suspense, but Alma Revel was the one holding the scissors. Alma was his wife, his collaborator, his co-writer, his editor. They met in the silent era. Long before Alfred had a belly or a reputation, she was sharp, meticulous, and absolutely ruthless with story logic. Colleagues said the Hitchcock touch had 4 hands, but only 2 got credit. While Hitchcock obsessed over icy blondes, Alma obsessed over continuity. She'd notice if a glass of milk had too much foam in a cutaway. She'd rewrite dialogue when Alfred's wordplay fell flat. She was the uncredited co-director of dozens of films. And yet, while he was sculpting women on screen, Alma was sculpting Hitchcock himself. The paradox of partnership. Here's the paradox. Alma built him up, and then watched him tear others down. She was loyal, maybe complicit. Hedren said Alma knew what was happening, but Alma stayed silent. Maybe she thought Hitchcock's lusts were just part of the creative process. Maybe she believed protecting his genius meant swallowing his sins. That's the tragedy of Alma. She kept the machine running even as it ground people up. The domestic irony. Their marriage was famously sexless. At least that's how friends described it. Hitchcock himself joked about impotence, about being more interested in food than flesh, and yet his films were dripping with lust. It's like he exported all his desire to the screen and none of it to his bed. So picture it. Alma, the real partner, the bedmate, the co-writer, invisible. While the world's most famous director poured his erotic energy into actresses he controlled and punished, the wife got silence. The blonde got obsession. The Annals beat. So what do we make of Alma? The unsung co-author of cinema's greatest thrillers? The quiet wife who maybe looked the other way? The editor who could cut a frame of film but couldn't cut her husband loose? If Hitchcock's lust was a fire, Alma was both the fuel and the fireproof wall. Without her, the movies wouldn't have burned so bright. Because of her, the burn left scars. And while Alma anchored him at home, Hitchcock's imagination drifted into forbidden waters. Lust the code couldn't name. Act 7. Queer desire and forbidden looks. Hitchcock's lust wasn't all trains and blondes. Sometimes it bent sideways, into places the code called unnatural. And under those rules, queerness could never walk on screen openly. So Hitchcock made it linger. In glances and obsessions and touches that lasted a breath too long. Rebecca, the lady in black lace. Take Rebecca, 1940. We never see the title character, she's already dead. But Mrs. Danvers, the housekeeper, clings to her memory like a lover. She caresses Rebecca's lingerie, whispers about her scent, invites the new Mrs. De Winter to feel silk, smell the perfume. The censors called it subtext. The audience called it devotion. We call it what it was. Queer obsession, smuggled past the gate. Danvers' lust for a ghost is one of Hitchcock's dirtiest tricks. Sapphic desire as Gothic menace. Rope, the lovers who kill together. And then there's Rope, 1948. Two men strangle a classmate for the thrill, hide the body in a trunk, and serve dinner on top of it. Sounds like a crime story, but critics, and anyone with eyes, saw the coded couple. Their partnership has all the hallmarks of intimacy. Shared secrets, bickering like spouses, one dominant, one submissive. The censors saw roommates. Audiences saw lovers packed with a corpse as their bedfellow. Rope wasn't just a thriller, it was a threesome. Man, man, and murder. Strangers on a Train, 1951, is another lust puzzle. Guy is the clean-cut tennis star. Bruno is the flamboyant, charming psychopath. Bruno suggests a murder swap. I'll kill your wife, you kill my father. But watch closely. The way he leans in, the way his eyes linger. This isn't just a proposition, it's a pickup line. The intimacy isn't in the deal, it's in the desire Bruno projects. He doesn't want Guy's soul, he wants Guy. Queerness as menace, and as thrill. Hitchcock's queerness was always coded as danger. Danvers burns down the house. Bruno stalks and strangles. The Rope boys kill for kicks. But here's the twist. Those characters are also the most magnetic on screen. The villains get the lust, the style, the glamour. They make the straight characters look dull. So while the code punished perversion, Hitchcock let it shimmer. He gave us queerness as forbidden fruit, taboos as turn-ons, desire wrapped in menace, yes, but still desire. Hitchcock didn't invent queer coding, but he perfected it. He turned repression into rhythm. hiding lust in shadows, glances, and innuendo. In Rebecca, a dead woman's lingerie was foreplay. In Rope, love and murder were bedfellows. In Strangers on a Train, a flirtation became a murder plot. If lust is crime, Hitchcock made crime sexy. And after all that queerness in the shadows, what's left is legacy. Not just the films, but the question. Was Hitchcock's lust confession, critique, or kink? Act 8. The Legacy of Looking. Alfred Hitchcock left behind more than 50 films, a golden statue, and a reputation as the master of suspense. But peel back that red curtain, and his real legacy is lust. On screen, he turned voyeurism into language. Every close-up of a stockinged ankle. Every kiss broken into fragments. Every train plunging into a tunnel. Lust was his grammar. He showed us how to look, and he made us feel guilty for liking it. Off-screen, he turned obsession into cruelty. He made a star out of Tippi Hedren and then tried to own her. When she resisted, he punished her with live birds, plaster heads, and a coffin doll. He froze her career like an insect in amber. Proof that his lust wasn't just cinematic, it was personal. In the shadows, he smuggled queerness past the censors. Mrs. Danvers caressing lingerie, Bruno flirting with the guy on the train. Rope's lovers killing together. Desire that Hollywood called unnatural, Hitchcock coded as thrilling, magnetic, and unforgettable. And beside him all along was Alma, the invisible hand, the wife who kept the machine running while the man she built aimed his lust elsewhere. The double verdict. So what do we do with this? On one scroll, he's the genius who changed film forever. He gave us techniques still copied today. The dolly zoom of Vertigo, the shower montage of Psycho, the match cut of a train into a tunnel that made teenagers blush for decades. He proved cinema could arouse without showing an inch of flesh. On the other scroll, he's the voyeur who abused his power, the man who turned lust into punishment, on screen and off, who made women into mannequins and then shattered them for refusing to play along, who smuggled kinks into the movies but never confessed to the damage they caused outside the frame. The annals beat. So what's Hitchcock's place in the annals? He was the peeping Tom of the annals, the man who didn't just watch but made the whole world watch with him. His films are masterpieces of desire and monuments of control. He made us voyeurs, he made us accomplices. And he left us with the question, was Hitchcock warning us about obsession or just inviting us in on his own? He turned the camera into a cock, the set into a stage for lust, and his actresses into sacrificial blondes. And in the end, he didn't just direct suspense, he directed shame. And now, his name is carved into the annals. The annals verdict. 2 scrolls, 1 legend. Was Hitchcock the master or the peeping Tom? Here in the annals, we know the truth. He was both. A genius and a predator. The same eye that gives us cinematic thrills also couldn't stop staring. And so his name is written twice, in gold on the film reels and in ink on the scroll of shame. Where shame becomes legend, where the camera never blinks. I came for the facts, you stayed for the filth, and now it's in the annals. If you've been caught looking through his keyhole tonight, don't just sneak away. Subscribe, review, follow, and join us on Patreon. Because in the annals, everyone's guilty of watching. Good night.